1 year on. A bit of good news. It's a mixed bag. Of course, it's been a tough year for all of us. And we know that lockdown measures also inadvertently exacerbated other social issues such as violence against women and children. The South African Police Service reported well over 2,000 calls for help in the first week of the lockdown last year. Many women's shelters around the country reached capacity. Lisa Vetten, a gender activist and researcher at the University of Johannesburg, is joining us now to look back at the year of lockdown through the lens of gender-based violence. Lisa, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time. I mean, the statistics that we've seen month in and month out during the lockdown, different organizations, yourselves as researchers, have really been terrible, showing that there was more GBV and more violence against children as well. But when you look back at this year, what have we learned in terms of the scourge of GBV?
I don't know if we've learned what we need to learn. And where we're not seeing the kind of learnings happening is particularly in relation to services. Because I think what the lockdown really exposed was all the underlying fragilities and precarities in services. It brought them very close to collapse in some instances. And one hasn't seen that being recognized in any of the employment or subsidies that government has promised to try and help businesses and others get on their feet. And we haven't seen it leading in any way to changes in the way the Department of Social Development issues their subsidies. So that's a concern, because some of the issues that shelters faced under the lockdown was that they didn't get their money from the department. So it meant they didn't have any food for their residents, and in some instances had to close because they couldn't obviously provide an acceptable standard of living for women who needed them. I think the other issues that came out very clearly were problems around the police. So I think because there was so much interest being focused on enforcing the lockdown, there were cases of women being turned away or being too frightened to go to the police in case they got arrested for violating lockdown restrictions. But also that the police didn't have the vehicles to take women from where they were to shelters, because women couldn't obviously get there themselves in terms of the restrictions. So I think there are a lot of problems which haven't been addressed and will continue to linger and may possibly even be exacerbated now that we're going into a situation where we've been warned that there will be budget cuts all round, including in relation to services.
I was just going to come there, that resource-wise, it looks like as well it's been really tight. Though the President has announced that national plan, I'm just using that word loosely, in terms of the emergency plan to fight GBV, the resources are still not fully available.
No, they're not. And the point is, even those that are available, we have no idea where they're being targeted at. And so we haven't really seen that money necessarily being directed towards services and towards assisting them to be able to continue to offer what they can. And what happened under lockdown as well was that the Department of Social Development didn't spend all their funding. So that had to be returned to Treasury, which means that they will get less funding this year because Treasury takes the attitude that they obviously don't need the money if they couldn't spend it. So the question will then become is, will whoever is managing the funding for the National Strategic Plan think that the money needs to be diverted towards services, or will they use it and spend it on things like campaigns, putting up billboards or posters on lamps? And frankly, that doesn't really help women who are in abusive situations. They need assistance, they need safety, and they probably need some kind of a link towards an income generation or livelihood scheme. I mean, you've seen what the lockdown has done to women's employment. It hit them particularly hard. And so I think there are questions here around that's going to increase their dependency potentially on men who behave abusively. What thinking is going into how we try and get women back on their feet again and ensure they're not forced into remaining with abusive partners because of their economic dependence.
Thank you very much, Lisa Vetten there. She's a gender activist and researcher from the University of Johannesburg, giving us some of her reflections as we look back on the impact of 1 year of lockdown in the country in terms of the fight against gender-based violence.